Okay, so I watched a couple of videos this morning, and they were addressing issues like scientism and questions of morality and whether or not morality was objective or subjective, and questions of vegetarianism and Holocaust denying, and just so many interesting topics and things that are being said. And rather than respond to any one of those, I guess I want to see if I can't, and against my better judgment, I'm compelled into responding, which is again very interesting. This issue of responsiveness that Fred had brought up just recently, but I think the thing that I want to talk about is how morality is it's enervated or weakened by a kind of contemporary scientism. Yeah, and I want to see if I can get at that. That I don't think there's a qualm or a haggle to be had over the importance of science. And when I'm talking about science, I'm talking about scientific methods of testing and verification and falsifiability. And it really relies upon what has regularity and periodicity, all these kinds of characteristics that enable rigorous testing for what could be, again, repeatable enough to have a standardized or I don't want to call it a universal pattern, but enough of a pattern to give uh, reliable prediction, and I guess that's partly what you're after. As you move from what's sometimes called the hard sciences into the softer sciences and then the social sciences, I think some of this becomes very, very problematic. That is, you can report perhaps on, I guess, facts about the body, about evolution, but some of those are stochastic. They're not the same order as, bonding properties of various chemical elements. They're not the same property as, light speed, which is a universal. It's not, it has none of the regularity of just math rawly defined as, internally consistent tautological systems. Even if you're going to, grant things like non-Euclidean geometry. You're going to talk about, Riemann and Lobachevsky and some of the other people who have developed these, inner angles of triangles that are exceed 180 and all this kind of stuff. I I guess I don't. I'm at a loss for this issue of self-relation and or of relation generally, of relationships. I mean, I'm always interested in relationships, different kinds of relationships. It seems like time is sort of in here as a problem, but it seems as if one of the key characteristics of science is something like a kind of detached posture. Now, it gets difficult when you move to quantum mechanics and theoretical physics, but this is where it sort of sneaks in the back door. But I think in general, when we're talking about the kind of science that's made possible all those kinds of technologies where we go, wow, we're impressed, there must be really something there. I mean, it's the kinds of technologies and the real differences that science has made in our lives, both in medicine and in telecommunications and in transportation. I think these fields have given a kind of a credibility or a legitimacy to science's claim to knowing because they're able to really do things with that. But those kinds of science really depend upon a very detached posture where what you're talking about, I don't want to say it's there independent of the observer, but I think we're kind of talking about stuff that's there independent of the observer. I mean, we're talking about regular patterns of nature and of chemical and physical process, of mechanistic process. I think though, as soon as you move toward those issues that include human questions, human imagination, human concern over what isn't yet but should be. All the ways that negativity enters with language. I was thinking so much about the expression, what should have been done. What should have been done. That's how people talk. They say, yeah, what they should have done. And that's a reality in the human world. People can actually talk at great length about what should have been done. It's this impossible, non-existing, it's really fascinating. But I guess the point here is that when we try to take a detached posture toward ourselves, something's gone awry. We don't just sit and observe ourselves and try to witness the regular patterns. Now, there may be some use to trying to predict your own behavior, but you're also navigating your behavior with aspirations and goals. And much of this is stochastic. That is, it's not to be repeated. It's a once occurrent only phenomena. That is, each person is, I guess, statistically similar to other people in that we can predict with some reliability what their average likely lifespan will be, what diseases they're likely to have according to some range of dietary practices, given some knowledge about inheritance and I guess other influences that have borne upon their body. But I don't know if any of that really gets at this issue of their own experience, people's own experience of time, of their own relation to their own past, their own relation to their own future, their their ideal hopes for a better world. I mean, so much of the stuff that I think was going on in those videos, from yesterday that the Amazing Atheist and Paul's Ego had posted up, it is this sort of dilemma that I think happened. Okay, this would be the broad stroke of it. Okay, so that it's sort of like this: that people, they, the dawn of human awareness, sort of call it this way, the dawn of human awareness, whatever that means, broadly construed, not in a dogmatic way, but just broadly construed, was a kind of self-astonished, a hard to imagine an organism with such levels of, I guess, awareness and reflexivity and openness to time that it was able to recognize itself with such a degree of an intensity that it, rather than being able to just say, I am, I think the earliest statement was, the gods are, and that was it was like the gods or the divine or the divinities or the spiritual world or whatever this, it was like a principle that emerged for managing the problem of self-relation in an organism that would otherwise be driven with anxiety because it had its instincts eclipsed so radically, right? I mean, the kind of dependency that the human has from its long developmental sort of acculturation period where it, falls into the time of its culture, and then from there, I guess it slowly comes to self-awareness. I mean, it is funny, to ask the question, when did you have your first memory? At what age? Self-awareness. People who have epilepsy, temporal lobe epileptics, I mean, sometimes will report that after a grand mal seizure, they will be able to speak and have a functionality even though they may not know who they are. I mean, amnesia in general, forms of amnesia are quite fascinating. But again, the principle here is that it's as if there was some kind of, divinities that were postulated as a principle of self relation. And by that I mean it was a regulative principle by which this organism sought to manage newfound complexities of the way time evolved in nature. That is, time seems to be of many kinds, and there's an evolution of kinds of time with different organisms. And it's as if God or the gods, not a creator God, not a guy who was there in the beginning, or if anything, the the cosmos itself, it emerged and evolved to the degree that the gods evolved into being, and then from there the gods themselves seem to evolve as this principle. So at first in the Western tradition, and I'm talking about the Western tradition here, it it's as if the early Judaic god of eye for an eye was some attempt to deal with the thirst for justice in the human world, in the abstract temporal problem of vengeance, regret, remorse, loss, duty to family and larger collectives. That it's a continuation of various kinds of primate behavior, I would agree, but there's also a point where a difference of degree becomes a difference of kind, and new forms of self-relation become possible. See, this is why I think the vegetarian issue is so fascinating. I think that humans, Western modern culture, modern Western folks, they can actually struggle with the question of, is dietary practice a moral issue? I don't know if you can try to talk your dog into thinking about the morality of its dietary practices. Now, maybe there's some animals that you could train them into eating certain things or not eating others, and that may be the way you do it. But I don't know if other animals deliberate over their diet as, um, as again, as a conscious moral choice. See, now here's where the science again, the science is interesting in this. I mean, our teeth seem to suggest that we are not herbivores, and so we do seem to be omnivores. There does seem to be a kind of biological truth that is the science, as the science would come in. That is, I mean, the rigorous morphology based in genetic. Orientations, right? I mean, those people who do morphological studies through inheritance, they would show, look, we're actually omnivores. There was a great need for protein and to develop the new brain. There's a huge complex history there. If you go read Schlein's work. But I think the issue is that we, even if biologically are omnivores, I think we want to say, well, why can't we be herbivores? Why can't we now know what we know about diet and have moral admonishments to realize that our biology won't give us the ought from that is? See, now again, so let's go back to this issue of God as a principle is evolving, right? I mean, okay, so the early Judaic God was this kind of eye for an eye God. And it was trying to help people deal again with these problems of new found dimensions of temporality that had opened in nature by way of the human. Now, this covenant and this mode of self-relation as a principle, right? This then got surpassed by this historical figure, Jesus. Now, whether Jesus was a historical figure or a myth, whatever, I think people want to say, well, this was a radical transformation in possibilities of the mode of self-relation. Now, maybe it's overtold, and people can say that, and there are other people as well who I think we could offer up as changing it. But certainly there is a great difference between the Old Testament and the New Testament. Uh, People seem to, and this is, if you want to go to Nietzsche's work and look at the difference between the ancient, what was called master morality for the Greeks, and the sort of Roman guard, I mean, this sort of strength and courage was seen to be a virtue. Well, then along comes the Nazarene, and he inverts it, turns it into slave morality, where the meek, the weak, the sickly somehow become the virtuous. At any rate, we see newfound levels of compassion and forgiveness, new ways of trying to deal with the problem of self-other and the problem of relating to oneself. Now, today, again, I see people who, in a kind of scientism, are adopting a posture by which it's very subtle, but it's as if they're going to alleviate themselves from the duty and the struggle of moral choice and of self-becoming through I guess, some deliberation and I guess, again, a struggle for finding moral purpose in their life. And instead, they assume a kind of posture as if they're going to simply describe themselves and be told who they are. See, I think some people would say part of what makes humans humans is their ability to create themselves, to create meaning for themselves, to decide who they will be, who they will become. That what makes a person isn't what is in their genes, but it's what they aspire to. That your aspirations, your goals, and your actual movement toward those goals, not sitting around on a couch saying what your goals are, but your actual movement toward your goals are what define you, not what you ultimately achieve. And I think there's a kind of literalism that leads people to say, oh, those fools who are deluded with their great goals, not realizing that goals enliven our efforts toward them and they actually bring meaning to our lives. But I think there's also, it's as if, and I think this is part of what Paul's Egos video was about, there's a kind of self satisfied, I guess, wanting to give up on oneself and just relegate oneself to being, quotes, nothing more than an animal who wants some creature comforts. Now, is it true that we're just animals who want creature comforts? Part of me would say, well, is it true that we're just omnivores? See, there seems to be something about the human capacity to strive for ever, I guess, ever greatening capacities at, I do think it's things like compassion, but also about strength, about courage, about making a world that is more compassionate, but more robustly better for ourselves. And I think some of it, right? I guess when we're chasing this down, is I'm somewhat suspicious of the fully scientific worldview as it's practiced with the detached posture. Now, again, Peter brings up, which I thought was very interesting, and I would talk about these people at length. I think the thing about these philosophers is that, James had what he called radical empiricism, where for James relations are as real as things. He also had, pluralistic universe. Dewey Dewey's philosophy was sometimes called pragmatism, but that's not really right. I mean, Dewey's metaphysics was experimentalism, and so in that sense, yeah, Dewey was on board with particularly social experimentalism in his relations with Jane Addams. He thought, yeah, let's get in there and change the social configurations and see what happens. Um, as you move, though, toward these philosophers, I don't know if what you're going to do, especially with James, I mean, you're not going to get rid of some of the problems of what we mean by the unique dynamics of logos. I mean, Dewey, in his metaphysics, experience in nature, he will say communication is the most wondrous, right? It transformed an organismal sort of transpiring into things with a meaning. I mean, the world is made through communication for Dewey, and it carries a huge moral weight with it, but it's not the science of the detached observer. It's the person who's in there actively trying to move with goals in view, right? It's a very different kind of science. So, at any rate, this video has gone on way too long, and okay, so those are some thoughts. Thanks.